Hello everyone, this is Purnima and I'm very happy today. We are starting a new series on document understanding, myself and Leru Fernando. Leru Fernando, our MVP, needs no introduction. His vast contribution to the community speaks volumes about his expertise and quality of the work that he's doing. We are very fortunate that he's giving us some of our precious time for some exciting, high quality learning in DU. So typically these sessions are for people who already are working on deal. So we are trying, to help Leru from his side is trying to kind of help people who are already working on it and scale to the next level of proficiency. For beginners, we recommend you to refer to his classic series on DU. We will be giving you the link in the chat so you can always have a look at it. And Lehru in this series would like to address the real questions about DU, like identifying, solving complex scenarios in a practical environment, how to undo a mess that is already created, how do we plan and structure a complicated DU project, how do we estimate time and cost, and when and how to say no. I think this is something that we really at least I have also struggled with at times, how do I say no to a client? Like, there are times where we do have to say no as well. So not only this, he has some exciting job offers in hand. If you guys are interested working on DU and you'd like to scale up on that, always there are opportunities that, he has an abundance that you can always reach out to. And we are lucky to be receiving these precious tips from the expert himself. Thank you, Leru, for starting this series for us. So if you can take over, give a brief introduction about yourself, it would be awesome. Yeah.
Thank you, Purnima. So hello everyone, and so this series is coming through a lot of community interactions and also especially from Purnima as well, because she has been talking to me for a long time, as you guys maybe know. Knowing this, we all are in the same team in our company, so we share a lot of things about document understanding, and one day she came up with this idea about why not do a series like this. So we thought of doing that together. And yeah, so um, the main idea behind that is like we have been talking about a lot of technical stuff, and there are a lot of resources available online about how to create a document understanding project. But when it comes to the real thing, it's a little bit different than what we usually talk about. So this is to share that and how to deal with a document understanding project in real world. So it's coming with a little bit of experience.
Great. So thanks for that. So I think let us start maybe with addressing the elephant in the room. So, I mean, personally, when we hear the name document understanding, it feels boring, maybe scary for some of us here for two reasons. One is that the documents are generally very unstructured and does not follow a pattern, right? So training with them will definitely be, cumbersome. That's the mindset we have. And we have only few reference materials. I mean, there are videos, there are a lot of support for this to learn the tool, but I think as far as the practicality is concerned, there's a large gap and there are too many challenges to handle. So why should I get into that? That's another thing that people kind of hesitate. So what would you like to say, to for these things, and why do you feel, in other words, why do you feel people, why do you feel for document understanding so much? Why should people get into it? So if you can talk about it, yeah.
Yeah. So when it comes to document understanding, it's not that straightforward as we talk about any other UI automation or any API related things. In those cases we know the sequence that this is the flow that we need to build. But when it comes to document understanding, it's a little bit different because we mostly deal with data, a lot of data. And due to the nature of the document, as you mentioned, there are unstructured documents like emails and like In documents, you can see paragraphs of data sometimes, and even tables, handwritten data, what else? And also some level of structured data as well, um, like tables, for example. But you can see all kind of variations in documents. So even if you take the simplest thing that we all know, the invoice, the layout changes, but the data is somewhere there in some kind of a structure. So it's more like a semi-structured one. But when it comes to legal documents, it's mostly unstructured. You see lots and lots of paragraphs of text, and it's not the same always. But when it comes to usually forms and things like that, there's some kind of a structure that we can easily follow. Um, but when it comes to certain projects, it's not um, the case all the time. You might come across all these combinations. Uh, I came across some of these combinations in one of the projects, so that's what made it lot complicated than expected. So that's the challenge with document understanding. It's the nature of the document, and because of that, it's not easy to really come up with a sequential flow, just like we do in a usual UI automation or any other RPA project. So we need to think a lot, and we need to come up with a, a set of logic to extract the data and to verify whatever we extracted whether it's correct, and to make sure whether it's meeting all the business rules. So it's not easy. It's a lot of logic involved in that. So I think that's why it is a little bit scary. But it doesn't need, you don't need to be really scared about this, because if you can understand the complexity behind it, and if you know how to come up with these logics and everything, you need to do a little bit of logical thinking, and then it's easy. It's not the technology that is difficult, it's the logic part that is difficult.
Yeah. So personally, I have seen, of course, my experience with document understanding is very limited. But I have seen some, two kinds of documents. So one is, let's say, invoices and receipts, which has, which will have, let's say, date, total, amount on one side, and each of the documents will have the same content but in a different order. Like date may be up, total may be down, or date may be on the right side, total may be on the left side, but all the contents are there in those documents. Vis-a-vis another kind of documents, which is like resumes, which is like, at least in the Indian scenario, there is no particular structure that we give for resumes. So I have seen all kinds of resumes which have, the plain simple document, or sometimes they add their images, or sometimes if they are, applying for any kind of graphics or those kind of, they like to showcase their, so those kind of, and they have come in various formats, doc, RTF. So how do you, before you get into it, how do you kind of put them together? Like what is the study you do, and how do you move forward from the step one, right? So will you talk a little bit about that to be? Uh,
Yeah. So that's a very good question. So basically, it's like this. Um, in any document understanding project, it could be any domain. It could be finance, it could be IT, it could be something else. Um, in any kind of domain, they have their own set of documents. They have their own structure, and they have their own rules. So basically, what we have to do is, the first important thing is, before starting any development, we first need to understand what they do. Just like in a normal RPA project, we go through a requirement gathering session, right, to
right.
capture each and every step, to understand what kind of things they do manually, what kind of business rules are there, what kind of um systems that are involved, and how they extract the data and everything. So we need to do the same thing here. And along with that, one important thing is we need to see the document. We cannot just like go through this flow and then decide, okay, this is the technology that I'm going to use. The most important thing is we need to actually see the real document.
Right.
Whatever the structure they are in, whatever the document they use or the format they use, it could be images, it could be PDF files, Word documents, anything. We just need to, go through these documents and understand uh, the layout of these documents, but where we can find the data that we need to extract and in which format you have those data. I'll tell you an example. In one of the projects, I came across a set of documents which is not structured. These documents are very unstructured because these are legal documents. And I had to extract the name of a person in that document. So yeah, so in one document, um, the the names were in a sequential order, like line by line. Every line there's a name that which I can easily extract. But in another document, it was a form. So there was a specific structure in that document which I had to look for the name in that structure and extract it. But the tricky thing is in another document, the same set of names were like in a single line, comma separated.
Wow, that's like for each of the document, if you're going to have so many
Yes,
different structures, then
yeah,
it can be crazy, right? How did you handle this, man? Wow.
yeah. It was the complexity. So that's why I said it's the data that is complicated. It's not the technology. So that's why you actually need to see these kind of documents, and then once you see all these combinations, then you can easily come up with the idea how you are going to extract it, and based on that you can think what kind of technology you can use, whether it's machine learning or whether it's let's say regex, the most basic thing, or whether it's the template that you can create in, you have different templates that you can use in document understanding, or whether it's something else altogether. So these combinations can help you extract all the information. So for this particular thing, I had to use a combination of things. One was a template, and another was named entity recognition, and another was machine learning. So it was like multiple things together.
Wow.
Um, yeah, so that's why to decide on those things, we really need to see what we need to extract and the complexity behind it. So then we can decide from where we are going to extract and what are the conditions that we can include to verify the data that we extracted is correct and so on.
Right.
Ultimately,
So,
the end goal is whatever the layout you have in the document, we need to extract the information, verify it, and put it into a more structured layout so that we can use it in the other processes that we are going to use it, like updating a separate system or something.
okay. Okay, great. So, I would love to hear more about this, in detail. How did you, uh, I remember you telling me that you've kind of done two kinds of work. One where there was so much intense complexity, probably something like this that you were talking about, where each document had a different behavioral pattern to it. And you were actually able to involve yourself deep and give a very high quality solution, right? And train a large number of documents. I recall you mentioning that. I think this was the example you were talking about. I'd love to hear more on that. The second scenario will be with much. You also told me that the complexity was not much in terms of cracking the logic, but there was some struggle in getting the deliverables done. So this was very surprising for me. So high complexity solution, you were able to give a high quality output, whereas a simpler complexity solution, you were, struggling to somewhere, struggling to deliver. So before we get into this in detail, I have A couple of questions for you, a very short and brief question before we enter into this. One, at when do you tell a client, oh, this cannot be done with document understanding? Like, can everything be done? Like, any kind of document, handwritten, is there a way? What are the things that typically cannot be done by a DU? That is one thing I would like to really be wanting to ask you. And the second question I would like to ask you is, I know that you have been, like you have told me, you've grown literally along with UiPath, right? You have seen, you have actually contributed somewhere to even to the community to kind of build certain tools. You've given suggestions, and you've started from, hand holding UiPath from where it started, which is amazing. So if you could share that experience as well, especially with respect to DU, putting together, like how that experience has helped you in any way, if at all it's helped you in your approach, because we have not seen, and we probably will never get a chance to see that, because that has happened when it started. That's something that you could talk about. It will be great. So yeah, please.
Yeah, so I think that's a lot of questions.
I'm sorry. I just have to bring it
No
out.
worries. I'll start with the first one. Like um, getting to know the document understanding thing when it was initially introduced. So as I remember, sorry if I'm wrong, as I remember, I think they introduced this in 2019. Uh, is it? Yeah, I think so. So back then, it was the time that I was also starting on RPA. And the interesting thing is, right at this time, I also got the opportunity to work on a POC for a client, and that was on invoice processing for one of the retail clients. So we were looking for different solutions, and we came across the document understanding for the very very first time, and it was released like a couple of days ago back then. So we thought maybe that's a good thing to check, and we started exploring it. So it was the very first release on document understanding. So back then we did not have all these awesome features like the form extractors and everything. It was the most basic version. We just had the machine learning extractor and the digitizing and those stuff. No classification, nothing else. Um, so we use that to see how we can extract the data. And it was the very first release, and we had to struggle a lot because there were a lot of technical things that we did not understand, and there were some issues as well, which we spoke with UiPath and got those things resolved as we did the POC. So that was the initial struggle with DU, which was a very good experience because we also got the chance to talk with the product team and understand why these things are happening and how to resolve those things. Um, so that actually gave me a lot of understanding about how it works, and it's from the foundation itself. And and from there onwards, the new features that they introduced is on top of that, right? So
Yeah.
that what helped me to understand the things in more detail level, and I know what happens uh, behind the scenes, so I can easily relate whatever I do now to that.
That's
So
great.
that was the initial experience, and yeah. So then coming back to this project, the complicated one and the the other one.
Just
So the
before
most
that,
complicated, yeah,
sorry to interrupt. Just before
yeah.
that, when do you say no? That was one question that I have always wanted to. Is the possibility? Can you do anything and everything under document understanding, or is there a way where you say no, like no, this cannot be done? You know, how do you make that call whether it's possible or not? Because in the beginning, you will have to kind of tell the client, right? Like, okay, this can be possible, this is not possible. So is there anything like that, or everything can be tried and fit into DU? How does it work?
Yeah, there are some instances where you need to say no. You can't say yes for every single thing because in technology also there are some level of limitation. Um, so to do that, um, we just need to understand the possibilities of this thing and the features it has, and then see what the client expects and decide whether it's possible to do with this technology or whether we need to go ahead with another technology that has that thing that they're looking for. So it's not directly a no. First, what I usually do is I just don't go and say no directly. I always try to find at least a workaround solution for them. So the first thing that I usually do is if I don't know the answer, I will just take some time to explore a little bit.
Hmm. Okay.
Then I'll see whether it's possible to do it uh, UiPath document understanding, or whether there's a different tool that is capable of doing it. So
Okay.
sometimes we might see that none of those things are working, and then we can say no.
Okay.
But if that's possible with either UiPath or something else, then we can tell them that without saying no, we can say that this is not possible with this tool, but we can use this workaround to come up with this thing or to solve this problem.
That's great. That's really good to know. So you can actually use a combination of tools and ultimately get it done. So that's very
Yes.
really nice.
Yeah.
So
So
awesome.
one example is, I'll tell you. So with the same example that I told you earlier, where we had all those combinations and the name pattern that was there, like comma separated and line by line and in a form, and sometimes it was handwritten as well. So you
Hmm.
can imagine the level of complexity in that, and
Absolutely.
especially when it comes to handwritten.
Yes.
And the good thing is it was all in English, so we didn't have the language as a challenge.
Oh yeah, that's another challenge that you probably have, right? A different language also. Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
so with those things, that was a bit of a challenge because it was not easy to just use machine learning only to extract all those things because the layout completely differs and there are a lot of variations that we need to look for. So at that time, I had to tell them like we can use machine learning, but there's a limitation. This is the reason, and give me some time to explore a little bit and see what are the other workarounds that we can use in UiPath to come up with a solution for this. And that's where I introduced the named entity recognition. It's it's a machine learning model that's available with UiPath in AI Center,
Hmm.
but ideally it's not used within document understanding. It's a totally different thing altogether. But um, with a little bit of research, we figured out that this out of the box thing, if we plug it into document understanding with a little bit of additional things, we can extract the information we need. But the complexity is we need to come up with some logics to ensure the data that we extract is correct. Because what happens with named entity recognition is it expects a string as a input, and what it gives as output is the names and all the other stuff.
Wow. How does it
And
organize? Amazing.
yeah, that comes in as a JSON. So we had to come up with several logics to ensure the values that we are looking at is the exact value that we are we are looking for to extract, because it's not just one name in the document. There are so many names, but we are looking for a specific set of names.
Okay.
um, so that logic is complicated, but if you actually think about the technology, it's already there and you just need to plug it in, and that's the easy part. The complex thing is trying to figure out whether you extracted the correct thing.
Right. So great. Thanks for your input. I think our viewers now will be ready with a cup of coffee. I feel like having one myself before we go into this further into this interesting conversation. Leru, yes. Now let's talk about the intensity of the two projects that you have handled. I'm just very curious to know. I mean, usually when it is complex, your solution quality comes down, and when it's simpler, your solution quality is better. So you said the opposite. So I'm very curious to know uh, what happened, what went right here, and what did not go right here. So please.
Yeah, so I'll start with the complicated one. So I'm not allowed to share a lot of details about the client or everything. So I'll just explain the process. Um, so basically, one process, um, we had like 150 or more different types of documents for them. And in each type, you can see different documents. Like, let's say you have a type called A. And in that type, you will see emails, you will see legal documents, you will see some other types of documents with a specific structure, and you will see some documents without a specific structure. So even in one type, you see a lot of different types of documents. And
Mhm,
likewise,
mhm.
you have 150 different types. So it's a lot of documents. And the first thing is trying to classify these documents into these categories. The challenge there was we cannot just give any kind of keywords. We had to manually look for the keywords because the next challenge there was the if you use a specific keyword, there's a very high possibility where you can find that keyword in another document that belongs to a different category.
Can you repeat that, please? I didn't get that. The keyword.
Okay, yes. So the classification is done through keywords, keywords that
Mhm.
you find in the document, just like the usual scenario, the invoice processing. The likely keyword is the word invoice, right?
Okay.
So using these keywords, we identify to which category this thing belongs to out of that 150.
Oh, okay.
So because of the nature of these documents, because there are so many variations, there was a very likelihood that whatever the keyword that we use can be found in as other documents that belong to different categories.
Okay.
So basically, it was not an easy task classifying this. So basically, we had to train a model to identify these things and do the classification properly because the client did not want to do this manually. They want to do this automatically without any human involved. Not a single minute to be spent on this.
Wow.
So it has to
Wow.
be fully automated.
So just to my understanding, so
Mhm.
you're saying that okay, there's a main category like invoices or receipts, which you will have the classification, and within that you have those set of rules that you define uh,
Mm.
to identify whether the document is of an invoice type or a receipt type or any other type. Is that how you?
Yeah. Yeah.
I understand
So
this right.
if you have a type called invoice, this process is not a financial process. It's a different thing.
Okay.
So the invoice is the most understandable example. So we'll take that. So if you have a type called invoice, in that you will see different kind of documents. So we just need to find the proper keyword that belongs to this invoice category.
Okay.
So it was not just one keyword. So we basically had to ask for a lot of training data, and I remember there were like more than 2,000 documents that we had to go through to just to look for these keywords.
Oh
So
my
there was a
gosh.
lot of
Wow.
effort spent from both our side and from the client side to group these documents because we have no idea to which category that document belongs to. They have that expertise. So we had to spend a lot of time with them trying to understand these different categories and the documents that belong to those categories. But we
Wow.
had to figure out the keywords. that they're not going to share. So we basically went through all these documents and started giving keywords manually because we realized that if we use the intelligent keyword classifier, it automatically picks the keywords. But because of the complexity involved and that keyword can be there in another type, that is not possible. So we had to manually define it. So we had to go through each and every document and then provide the keywords manually, then run it and see whether that works as expected or if it still goes to a different category, and there were a lot of fine tuning involved. So
Right.
it was like not a straightforward thing. We had to spend about 2 or 3 weeks to come up with the best classifier that we can come up with. And then another bunch of logic behind it to again validate, because there's no manual intervention, again validate that it's correct.
Yeah.
So that was the first complexity. And then the next complexity is the extraction, as I explained before, all those different formats. So we had to use machine learning, the NER, and regex, and many other things, again, along with a lot of complicated logic to verify the data extracted is correct.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, so that's the second thing. The third thing is these names that we extract, we realize that it doesn't exactly match with the system that we need to update this data into. So let's say the document has Purnima as the name, but in the system it will say something else, maybe your other name.
Full name or
So we had to figure out another way to match this name that we have with that name.
wow. It can be anything. How do you arrive
Yeah,
at patterns?
yeah. So we had
Sounds
to come up with
impossible to me
some.
actually.
We had to come up with some pattern matching logic. The most interesting thing was in the document, let's say my full name goes as Lahiru Kanchan Vichanayaka Fernando. But in the system, it will say Lahiru Fernando or El Fernando. So it's
Yeah,
not the same
yeah,
at all.
exactly. So wow.
So we had to come up with another interesting logic there to match whatever we extracted with that name and to ensure that it is properly matching. And we did that. So we had a separate logic for that. So there were lots and lots of logic in it. So these are real use cases. So that's why. So it's not the technology, as I said, right? There are more than enough things that you can extract all the information. You can pattern match all this stuff, but writing this logic, that's not easy. So you have to think a lot, and you have to come up with a proper structure or a design to do that.
So
So
you
we
give
had to start it from the very beginning itself and come up with that flow. Then it's easy.
wow. So you kind of give a dictionary kind of thing, is it? This is the name. These are the various combinations at the back end, or that's
We cannot do that because we don't know the combination.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
so the combinations it had to figure out on its own. So we had
okay.
to make the code dynamic as possible to do that. So it
Wow.
kind of does it on its own.
Okay.
Yeah, so
So
that's the most complicated one.
uh-huh.
And yeah, so the best thing is we the good thing is we actually came up with a good design for this at the beginning itself, understanding all these complexities, and that really helped to figure out what technologies we need to use and how to come up with these logics and everything. So that is one good thing that we had, and one of the strong points, as I believe. Otherwise, it would have been a lot more complicated.
So from my perspective, when I hear you speak, I am understanding that the actual coding in the tool is the last and probably the physical coding is probably the simpler part of the whole process. Probably the tougher part would be to understand it, arrive at what you're going to do, how you're going to do. whether we need combination of tools, whether we need to devise an intelligence within the logic, like you said, names, and I'm like, oh my god! As soon as you said that, it's something like a date and a total, I can understand. You take the numeric or the date format field, use a regex, and do all of that. But something like this, it's so you would have asked for the client a lot of time uh, to kind of get this very very strong, right? Otherwise it could get chaotic. If you just like start, okay, I'm going to start like next week, I can start your project, right? And you sit and start coding it would have gone crazy totally. But you managed a brilliant output. And I remember the client was like totally over the moon, with that deliverable. I remember that. You've told me this. So that's amazing to hear. So is my understanding right?
Yeah. So even for us at the beginning, we could not come up with a estimate at the without knowing any details, right? So we had to get deep into this process and understand all these things, and then come up with a design, and then only you can give an estimate, because then you know what you are going to do, and then you know what kind of technologies that are needed to do this, and then you can give an estimate for that. So that's what we did, and the project was more like a 2 to 3 months thing, and we completed that on time. So yeah, so we can talk about a lot more things about how to come up with these estimations in a later session, because there are so many things involved to figure that
Yeah,
out.
absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, estimation we will get into it at a later date. But what do you do? I mean, so when you are reading a document or when you're trying to understand it, I mean, from a layman's perspective, how do you start? Do you take a notebook and pen, you jot down the points, or you draw, or you think, you just visualize in your head, and how do you put it all together? Because it's a vast thing. I mean, 2,000 documents you have read through to identify the pattern. There has to be some kind of sequence that you follow, right? Which makes it easier for you as well as the client to understand and bridge it together. So please, can you talk
Yeah.
a little
So
about
I
it?
use two things. One is um, my own way of looking at the documents. It may apply to all of you. So if you actually look at a document that you have not seen before, what would you do? How do you go through it? You know that these are the things that you need to look for. That's all you know. But
Yeah,
you don't know the structure of the document. You don't know where these things are. You just look at it from the beginning, right?
right.
You come from the top, you just fall down and you just see line by line what things are there, how the structure looks like, and how the
Or
data looks
probably
like.
start with highlighting those areas,
Yes, right.
kind of to.
Yeah. So that's kind of the same thing that I do. And if you actually convert that to a technical view, how would your uh, the robot or the bot or the assistant, whatever you like to call it, would look at it? Probably the same, right? Because the bot will not know what kind of a document that is and how the layout looks like, especially in this scenario. So it's the same thinking or the same way that we do is what the robot is going to do.
Wow. So you're
That's one
actually
thing.
treating the bot as your peer, kind of. So if I
Yes.
don't know what will, you're actually thinking on, okay, if I don't know, the bot won't know. And in that
Yeah.
manner, you are training, you're considering
Mm.
bot as a partner in this, in every
Yeah.
step. That's very
Yes.
interesting.
That's the key. Because
Wow.
if I keep myself there saying that I am the robot and someone has given me this document and I need to extract this data, what would I do? And that's the logic that we need to implement. So that's
Wow, wow,
one.
this is an awesome input. I mean, at that stage, we don't think usually, you're hand holding along with the robo and you're going each step. That's
Yeah.
amazing too. true. Thanks for
Yeah.
that. That's a takeaway for me, actually. Wow.
Yeah, so that's one thing. And then the other thing is, along with this requirement gathering session, what I do is I draw everything in a diagram. Each and
Wow.
every step, each and every decision, each and every thing that I think that's needed, I put it into a diagram and then you can connect everything later. So that ultimately becomes the solution design.
Wow. So it basically all your questions, all your
Yeah,
doubts, you just draw it. You just say, can I
yeah,
do this or that? Okay, put it up. And then will we look at these kind of rules this way or that way? Then just draw it. Don't
yeah.
whether it's right or wrong doesn't matter. Is that what you're saying? Just draw
Yes,
it.
that's right. Yeah. You just draw
Wow.
it, and once you draw it in the most detailed level, you figure out the missing part. You will eventually get there because you know that you cannot complete the diagram without knowing this because you are drawing it in the most detailed level that you can ever come up with.
This is
And
brilliant.
that gives you the missing parts, and then you can show that to your client and verify whether this is correct and whether all the business rules are involved, and then you can convert that into your final solution design.
Wow, and this, I think this you kind of naturally scale to a, like you said, like a solution architect level, right? Because you start asking the right questions, because you
Yeah,
are mapped everything, and you know that there are gaps, so you really ask, okay, there is a gap between these two. What do I do here? And the client will be like, yes, that's the right question. So that's the I was always thought how all questions can, of course, 100% queries cannot be covered, but this is a very good start to slowly unravel each layer, I would say, right? So first
yeah,
you go through that, highlight certain sections, then think how the bot thinks, what are all the things that it should also not find it difficult from that perspective. You take notes, all your questions, put it up diagrammatically first. Doesn't matter whether it is silly or whether it is, may not be possible. It's all your questions. So just put it diagrammatically, identify the gaps, list them down, talk to the client, right? That would be like the summary of what you said, right?
yes, that's right. That actually helps to solve a lot of complexities and a lot of issues. And then we know what we are doing.
Wow. And I think when somebody looks at a, a, a diagrammatic representation, it gets onto their memory very quickly rather than a big list of questions like 5-10 pages, and where you are like, where this and then it goes back there and things like that. Instead of it, you connect it through a flow chart or a diagram. I think that sticks to my memory very well. So thanks for that input as well. So it's lovely. So this is how you approached it. Did you face any challenges while you were executing, or something that happened wrong or not the way you wanted it to, and you had to step back and do certain correction in spite of all this planning? Did everything end up perfectly, or were there challenges that you had to handle as well? So you can
Yeah, it's not always a perfect journey. That's not possible. So even with all those planning and designing, still when it comes to development, you come across with a lot of challenges. So that's where we need to um, do a little bit of research for ourselves and try to figure out how to resolve those things because these things are mostly technical challenges. Yeah, so that is a different thing. So there were a lot of challenges like that, especially in coming up with all these logics and everything. It's not easy uh, because initially we might think that this flow will work, but when you actually do things and when you actually have all those combinations coming in, there are slight changes that we need to do here and there to support each and every combination.
But you didn't
So
land into any really messy situations naturally, because you have followed a very, very detailed approach. So this is the key to avoid like a huge confusion, right? You might definitely be facing challenges which you will be able to understand in a better way because you're so sorted in foundation level itself, right? Like if
Yeah.
my understanding of that is right.
Yeah, so the foundation is the most important thing. So if you have the proper knowledge in how these things work and what kind of logic that you need to build, and then whatever comes next, you can plug it in on top of that. But if you don't know the foundation, then you just build a logic with the data information you have at the moment, and then later if something pops up, then changing that logic to incorporate that is going to be difficult because you already have something in place and you have connected the things in that
Yeah.
way. And when something totally different comes in, you have to change a lot of things. And you might create it, but that might not be the best design.
Right, right. Wow. Uh, so yeah, wait. So coming to the second aspect of your project, where you said that scenarios were fairly okay, when it wasn't as complex as what you just, this probably this project, but still there was a struggle in delivering. So why was that gap, and uh, how did that happen? I mean, when you can solve such a complex query, this should have been a breeze, but what happened there?
Yeah, that was a totally different experience. So basically, what happened there was it was a invoice processing thing, and the business rules were a little bit complicated, but compared to the previous one, it was pretty much straightforward. But the challenge we had there was um, we did not have the proper requirement gathering done. There were a lot of things, a lot of unknowns. So we had to create. There were a lot of complexities behind it. Several reasons for why it is like that, but which I cannot discuss for now. But the reason is the main reason is we did not have the proper requirement gathering, and that ended up knowing some of the things, and we did not know some of the other scenarios that are already there. So we created the flow, and then while doing testing, we realized, okay, so there are scenarios that we don't know, and trying to plug those in was a little bit complicated because we already had something in place, and now discovering new things, new combinations, new data, and then writing a logic for that and trying to combine that with whatever the things that already existing. That takes a lot of time, a lot of thinking, and that integration was not that easy.
Yeah, so this is, I think, one of the real challenges and real questions that probably has, to my knowledge, not addressed in the forums before, because usually we take up a perfect scenario and we kind of talk through it. But when you're in a when you're halfway through already running project and you find these challenges, so you take a step back. How do you convince the client, like, okay, how do you where do you start here? I mean, it's already halfway through, there are no proper requirements done, there are other challenges, probably you don't have sufficient documentation as well. So how is your state of mind, from a very complex planning person kind of a personality to shifting to something that is, uh, I would not say chaotic, but I would say unplanned or unstructured, right? It's and you're in the middle of it, like in the eye of the storm. How do you? What do you do? I
Yeah,
mean, how do you
yeah,
approach?
that's another place where you need to say no.
Uh,
Yeah, because if we like continue development like that, adding more and more logic and more things into that, then at some point we'll end up in a scenario where we cannot even go back,
oh
and
wow.
we might end up in uh, starting from scratch again because we cannot do things from that point. I'll tell you one example. This is not a document understanding thing, but it's a different thing. Um, there was another scenario where uh, uh, some people had an automated project process which was running to do certain things, and they also had a set of requirements where they needed to do some enhancements and also add some new features. So we basically had to do analysis, understand the process, and understand what they already have, and see how we can plug those new things that they expect. Um, so that process was not designed in a proper way, and it did not follow any best practices, and there were a lot of issues already. So we had to fix those things as well. And with the analysis, we figured out because of the way it is designed, um, we really cannot include any of those new things. If we do, that will end up in a very bad situation where it might not even run properly, and
Right.
it was not reliable at all. So at that point, we had to say no and say that we can't do this. We had to start it from the beginning because of this reason. So we had to. It's not an easy decision, and saying no to something like that is not easy because they expect us to include these things in whatever they already have, right? And you're going and saying that you need to start from the beginning
Yeah, I mean,
and you
the
need to
requirement
spend,
documents are already signed and everything is
yeah,
moving. So you need to step back, and that
yes,
needs guts. You need to step back and you need to say, listen, this was signed up, but this has these challenges. So either we keep it as a change request and we re-sign the document, or we ask for extra days to kind of fit this in. So you have to kind of put your stance there and say this is how is the best way forward from here, right?
yeah.
That guts. I think that's a guts that you need to have to tell them, like, let's slow down here, isn't it?
Yeah, so in both of those scenarios, in the one that I just explained and also in that document understanding project, we had to say that this is not going to work like this. So we gave a estimate that we need this much of time to fix whatever the things that's needed, and until such time we are not going to do anything new. We will only focus on correcting these things, and we fixed those things up to a certain extent, which we thought that it will give some level of reliability and some level of best practices to this process. Because in this document understanding thing, we cannot go back and start from the beginning. That's not possible. So whatever we have right now, we had to convert that into what we think that's the best to
Yeah.
to make sure that whatever is there is reliable, and also to ensure whatever we are going to build is going to fit into that thing without breaking it. So we had to do a lot of analysis there, try to come up with whatever the things needed. So thinking about those things, there are a lot of things again involved. So we can discuss that again in another session, how to fix those things. But that was the approach overall, and we fixed that. And now we are continuing with the rest of the year.
Wow,
And we
I
also
mean, it's
did,
like so much. Yeah.
yeah, we also did a lot of other things other than fixing stuff, like giving some awareness to the business people, and uh, from our side and also from the business people, trying to connect and get the proper requirements done before getting into development and documenting those things, sharing these documents with them, and a lot of stuff involved. And yeah, so we had to do all those things to get things fixed.
Wow, this is very, very, very interesting. I think our viewers we are almost, nearing the end of the episode 1, and I'm sure our viewers are very, very excited to know what's in store for us next, right? Personally, I would love to uh, hear the use case scenarios. Now you have explained verbally and you have told us, this is how you approached it, and a lot of takeaways for me. Thank you for that. I'm sure our viewers are feeling the same as well. So I think the purpose why we created this series, right? Why you wanted to share it is to really get into the practical scenarios with challenges which the people are facing and kind of handhold them to a proper direction, right? So I think viewers, I think we should really utilize this opportunity, come up with your questions, put it up in the communication, any communication media that you are comfortable with. Leheru Fernando, you can search him up in LinkedIn. He's there in YouTube. Even in this, you can scroll down and you can pass it on as a comment. And he will be answering all your queries. We are having a series just for all of us here. The more we ask, the more we benefit. As simple as that. So thank you, Leheru. I think this was one very, very awesome session, takeaways, and you address the real issues, the sensitive areas, I would say, the complexities, and what happens when you're joining an existing marathon that's already happening. You just like a sudden entry. So it's very, very exciting. Uh, so thank you. We close the episode 1 today and hope you enjoyed the session. We'd like to hear your comments, your feedbacks, and feel free to share it with any of your friends who you want to enhance document understanding, want to, uh, move to the next level or in their journey, who are looking for career opportunities in this field. Please feel to contact Veru Fernando, and we are always there to support you on this. Thank you so
Yeah, and one
much.
more thing on that. So we will also have like an open forum session where they can connect with us live and ask their question. So that is also open. So stay tuned for that as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, your time. I know how busy you are. Your schedule is like crazy, but you're still finding time for all of us here. So thank you so much. And yes, I think our viewers are definitely going to come up with a cup of coffee next time. So should we. So yeah, thank you so much. It was wonderful
Thank
talking
you.
to you.
Thank you, and see you in the next episode.
Sure. Bye bye.